Hello, all. This is Jeff coming to you with a recap of the Screwtape Letters, Chapter 10. And Chapter 10 really talks about a topic that we might not be very comfortable with, but we need to be made aware of. As we've talked about in past chapters, we need to become people of a maturity with which we are able to see how everything in life will either bring us closer to God or take us farther away from God. Everything. Today, we're going to add to that thought by looking at how every body we come into contact with in our life will either bring us closer to God or take us farther away from God. Now, again, we don't like talking about this, but it's still true nonetheless. We think that the devil is not going to try to use the very people in our life in order to take us away from God? Do we think this is some sort of cheap shot that the devil just will refuse to do? Oh, come on. In fact, especially if we are evangelistic mindset, or we care about the souls of people who don't know the Lord. We try to get out and we try to get to know people. We try to meet people so that we can help carry their burdens, and we can also help introduce them to Christ, and hopefully allow this to lead to their salvation. But the truth of the matter is that not everybody wants it. This is a very hard, bitter pill to swallow. But it's still true nonetheless. Not everybody wants to have a relationship with Christ. But they might also kind of egg us on a little bit, give us a little bit of hope, of maybe one day they'll come to the Lord. But all the while, we're still putting energy into them, we're still putting effort into them, and in the end, it's going to wear us out. But also, again, most people want to have a good quantity of friends. Just people in their life whom they can trust, they can depend on, they can walk this life with. And again, the thing about it is that sometimes the people who are the closest to us are also the people who are doing the most to lead us away from God. Can we have the discipline and the maturity to be able to see who is helping us get closer to God and who is trying to take us farther away? Now, again, if we never know anybody who does not know the Lord, then that's not necessarily a good place to be. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is not just dealing with people who don't know God, but we're talking about people who are in an active campaign to A, not want a relationship with God, and B, in an active campaign to take you away from God. Okay, so hopefully we can tell this difference, because that's really the difference that we're talking about. And so that's what we're talking about today: the power of new acquaintances in our lives, the power of new friends in our lives, and also this letter is going to end with some scary teaching about how us trying to maintain all of our friendships, we might be tempted to sacrifice a relationship with God that we don't really want to sacrifice. But we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But Screwtape will say this at the beginning of the chapter. He'll say, "I gather that the middle-aged married couple who called at his office are just the sort of people we want him to know. Rich, smart, superficially intellectual, and brightly skeptical about everything in the world. I gather they are even vaguely pacifists, not on moral grounds, but from an ingrained habit of belittling anything that concerns the great mass of their fellow men, and from a dash of purely fashionable and literary communism. This is excellent. And you seem to have made good use of all his social, sexual, and intellectual vanity." There's a little verse in 1 Corinthians 15. And it's 1 Corinthians 15, verses 33 through 34. That says this: "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. Wake up from your drunken stupors, as is right, and do not go on sinning, for some have no knowledge of God. I say this to your shame." This is something that we've heard a lot. Maybe you heard this from your parents growing up. I used to hear it from my parents growing up. Bad company corrupts good morals. Well, they didn't just come up with that. They're quoting the Bible. And the thing about it is, if you look at what Screwtape's doing here, he's telling the story. And again, in the background part of the Screwtape letters, there's this ongoing story between Wormwood's patient. We've had it talking about the effects of World War II, the fear of going to war versus the fear of not going to war, and things like this. Well, this is the next way that Wormwood's really trying to get this guy to fall, and that is to introduce into his life somewhat we might call, upper class people with more influence, maybe better read, higher educated, make more money, and all this kind of stuff. And so the temptation now is to try to get Wormwood's patient in good with these people. Well, why? Well, so that these people will keep Wormwood's patient away from God. That's why. He's going to try to use social, sexual, intellectual vanity in order to keep him away. He's talking about putting this patient with a bunch of people who believe that they're too smart to have a belief in God, or that they're intellectually superior to care about things like this little war that's going on between England and Germany and the rest of the world. And so if they're not going to worry about that, why are they going to worry about the things of God? These are the type of people who are like, belittling anything of value, and try to view themselves as like separate from the regular hardships or struggles of lesser beings and all this. Maybe you've met people like this in your life, or seen people like this in your life. They don't. You can't take these things too seriously. Life will get you down, and all this kind of nonsense. And that's what it is. It's nonsense. But the thing about it is that if people are popular, if people are affluent, if people are of a higher degree than us in some way, be it finances, position, where they're from, where they're raised, how they were raised, or anything like this. And by the way, all this is based on our own opinion, not on anything of concrete value. Then again, the temptation is that I need to do what I can, how I can, dress any way I can in order that I can be more like them. It's high school all over again. Do we realize that some people never leave high school? You remember high school. You had your cliques, you had your different classes or troops of people. You had your athletes, you had your smart kids, you had your metalheads, you had the rap fans. You had the people who were from money, the people who were from the other side of the tracks. All these different groups, right? And people try to figure out very well which group they belong to, or if they try to move up, so to speak, to a higher group in their own mind. They'll change the way they dress, they'll change the way they talk, they'll change the way they walk, they'll change the way they act, and also they will sacrifice positive relationships that they already have, so then the so-called in crowd will like them more. And again, for some people, they never leave that concept. For some people, high school continues on. And they do this in the workforce, they do this in social circles. It just gets to be a more dangerous game, because now people will spend money that they don't have, try to amass all sorts of debt, and try to put themselves in spiritually dangerous situations just so they can be seen by the right people. And just so they can be accepted into the right circles, into the movers and the shakers and what have you. And again, so it's a very dangerous place to be. And what we're doing is that we're surrounding ourselves with people with bad morals, very possibly. And bad morals can corrupt good behavior. Why? Because then we'll want to become more like them. I've read it from psychologists. I've read this from people who try to life coach. I've heard this from people who set great goals for themselves and whatnot. And that's the truth of we are made up of the people we surround ourselves with. For example, if you surround yourself with very successful business people, you surround yourself with 5 successful business people, you'll be the 6th. If you surround yourself with 5 fitness people, you'll be the 6th, and just on down the line. We become the product of who we spend most of our time with. And so again, we just need to be careful who it is that we're spending time with. Screwtape will go on to say, he says, I don't think that matters much, provided that you can persuade him to postpone any open acknowledgement of the fact, and this, with the aid of shame, pride, modesty, and vanity, will be easy to do. As long as the postponement lasts, he will be in a false position. He will be silent when he ought to speak, and laugh when he ought to be silent. And he'll go on to say one of those very scary phrases that come out of this book. All mortals tend to turn into the thing that they are pretending to be. So again, it's this is the tricky thing about friendship. Again, we all wish to have friendship. It's the rare person who just wants to go through this entire life completely isolated and alone. We're social creatures. And so the thing about it is what are we willing to sacrifice in order to be part of the in crowd? What are we willing to sacrifice in order to be seen as much more than what we are? And we might say, well, I'm just pretending. I'm just pretending. I know I'll go around these people and they're not acting right, they're not doing right. And I know there are things that I should say, but what do we end up doing? We end up staying silent. We end up not saying a word. I like how Screwtape put it. He will be silent when he ought to speak and laugh when he ought to be silent. But we do it just so we can keep face, so that we can keep on pretending. But again, the problem with pretending is the reality is we are what we pretend to be. So we need to remember what the Bible talks about friendship. The Bible says a lot about friendship. We don't have time to discuss everything that the Bible says about friendship right now, but a good place to look to is Proverbs, for example. The book of Proverbs, it's a fascinating book. It's made up of 31 chapters. I've known Christians who, on top of their daily Bible reading, they will read 1 chapter of Proverbs every day. There's 31 chapters. You can get done with it in a month. And it's just filled with these truths. Now, again, the thing about Proverbs is people think that it's guaranteed. They're all guaranteed to work all the time. The poster child of this thinking is the proverb that says, train the child in the way he ought to go, and he'll never leave that path. But if you've ever raised kids, we know that sometimes that's not true. Now, here's the thing. If we train a child the way they ought to go, you're hedging your bets. In other words, the odds are in your favor that they will go the right way. But does it happen 100% of the time? And the answer to that is no. I like how one preacher described the book of Proverbs. He described it as divine possibilities. In other words, you follow what the book of Proverbs says, and then, again, you're hedging your bets. The odds are that this is the way that it'll work out. And so there's a lot of Proverbs that deal with friendship. And so consider what these say. We're going to go through some of these. And again, we don't have time to do everything, but consider these. Proverbs 13:20 says, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." Proverbs 14 verses 7 through 8 says, "Leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not meet words of knowledge. The wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving." Proverbs 18 verse 24 says, "A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Proverbs 22 verses 24 through 25 says, "Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. And verse 9 says, oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. So you look at these, and what are we learning about friendship? Okay, we learned friendship again, as we talked about a little bit earlier. We become the product of the people that we consider our friends or whom we spend the most time with. So if we spend most of our time with fools and people who are given to extreme anger and fall into sin very, very quickly and readily and don't care, then guess what? We're going to follow that same path eventually. If we insist on hanging out with these friends and wanting to be like them, that's where it's going to go. Also, contrariwise, if we spend our time and we consider our friends those people who are wise and discerning and seeking to follow the way of the Lord, okay, we can become like that as well, based on the people whom we spend our time with. We also learned that, again, the danger of hanging around people who are quick to anger. We also talk about how it's going to be your true friends who are going to stick to you when troubles come. They stick to you closer than a brother. And also a true friend will tell us the things that we need to hear and not just the things we want to hear. So again, a true God-given friend is a very powerful gift from God, because a true friend will make us better than we are, bring us closer to God, and tell us the things that we need to hear. And that's a blessing. That is a true blessing. And so guess what the devil wants to do? The devil would rather put us into situations where we are surrounded by people who will not tell us what we need to hear, but tell us what we want to hear. Will be driven towards quick anger and quick sin and want to bring us down that path as well, and take us farther away from God. And so we have to, and we might not like it, we might hate this idea, but it's still true. We have to be willing to look at our friends and see, okay, who is trying to help me get closer to God and who is trying to take me farther away. And don't say, well, I can pretend, because again, if we pretend, we're just turning into the very thing that we're pretending to be. Screwtape will go on to say this. He says, in modern Christian writings, though I see much, indeed more than I like, about Mammon, I see few of the old warnings about worldly vanities, the choice of friends, and the value of time. All that your patient would probably classify as Puritanism. And may I remark in passing that the value we have given to that word is one of the really solid triumphs of the last 100 years. By it we rescue annually thousands of humans from temperance, chastity, and sobriety of life. He'll go on to say, if he is a big enough fool, you can get him to realize the character of the friends only while they are absent. Their presence can be made to sweep away all criticism. If this succeeds, he can be induced to live, as I have known many humans live for quite long periods, two parallel lives. They will not only appear to be, but actually be, a different man in each of the circles he frequents. So again, it's this repeated theme of being imitators. Who are we going to be an imitator of? Sometimes we might. There's a great picture that I saw online. It's cute, but it's a row of 4 animals, right? 3 of them are penguins. The third animal in the row, though, is a duck wearing a tuxedo, and it's again, he's trying to imitate being a penguin. And that's the thing, is what are we going to be imitators of? We can either be imitators of the world, or we can be imitators of Christ. And again, whoever it is that we surround ourselves in life can help us make this decision. In Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, it says, therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. So be imitators of God. This world is going to try to get us to be imitators of it. Because if we can become an imitator of the world, an imitator of sinful people, then that's what we are. But if we can become imitators of God, then that will take us into the realm of virtue. But again, it's all about kind of like the word choice, the jargon that we talked about back in chapter 1 of this book, but it's still true nonetheless. It's about the various fads, and it's about going through seasons and going through stages, as we talked about last week or the week before. And the thing about it is that stages and fads and all this even includes how people study and read the Bible. For example, depending on what age you might be, what was the a big fad of the 50s, so to speak. That was the coonskin caps and things like this. And then you get into the 60s, we're talking about tie-dye and bell bottoms and civil unrest was even a fad. Then you get into the 70s, and you're talking about leisure suits and platform shoes. My favorite was the platform shoe with the goldfish in the heel. I just love that concept. But disco and all this, and then you get into the 80s, you got the Magic 8 Ball and the Rubik's Cube, and MTV and all these types of things, and then you get into the 90s, and it was the grunge bands and the flannel, and rap was more and more coming into its own, and all these types of things, and so for each decade that you have coming up, you had your various fads, things that quickly come into fashion then quickly leave. And it's the same thing with Bible teaching, as Screwtape talked about. Once upon a time, preachers and churches spoke more about worldly vanities, choice of friends, and value of time. These days, we don't like doing that as much. That's seen as old-fashioned or puritanical. Puritanism. I don't want to be seen as an extremist. Remember that from the last time we got together. We don't want to be seen as extreme. But a moderated religion is as good as no religion at all, Screwtape would say. But that's the way we want to view it. We don't want to be seen as a Puritan, the pilgrim. We don't want to be seen like a pilgrim with the buckle and the hat and the whole thing. We want to be seen as fun, as exciting, as somebody who can let our hair down and to have fun for a bit. But the thing about it is, what's the point of being able to do all that if the people that you're doing that with are going to take you away from God? What that's going to lead us to is to leading two parallel lives. And I think back to my teenage years in this. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I went to Skyline High School, which was part of the Dallas Independent School District, right? But I went to church in Mesquite, Texas, which is a different district, technically a different city, but it was all part of the Metroplex, right? So when I went to church with, the people of my age. Most of them, the vast majority of them, there were some Garland folk in there too, but the vast majority of the teenagers of my age group that went to church with me, they all went to, at the time, it was 4 high schools in Mesquite. But they were all part of the same district. And we had, again, kids that were going to the same schools. I didn't have that. I was like the only guy there that went to a Dallas school, which in Dallas at the time you had 16 high schools. And so I didn't go to school with none of my church friends. But I had a great bunch of school friends. And even though I didn't cuss, and I had my various issues. I wasn't a saint. But the thing about it is that I wasn't as bold at the time about my faith in my high school years. I did better my senior year a little bit, but not anywhere. I was nowhere near as brave as I am now. Because again, I was a kid. I was still trying to find my way. But I was put into this situation of living, of living kind of one way in my school situation, and then having this other identity with my church friends. And so, to put it bluntly, my church friends didn't know everything I did in high school, and my high school friends didn't know everything that I did with my church. That got a little better as I got a little older, but still, at the time, I could have done better. Looking back, honestly, I could have done better. But that was the situation that this very thinking put me in, the having to live the double life. And it can become a very finicky thing. Screwtape will go on to say, you see the idea. The worldly friends touch him on one side and the grocer on the other, and he is the complete, balanced, complex man who sees round them all. Thus, while being permanently treacherous to at least two sets of people, he will feel instead of shame a continual undercurrent of self-satisfaction. Finally, if all else fails, you can persuade him in defiance of conscience to continue the new acquaintance on the ground that he is in some unspecified way doing these people good, quote unquote, by the mere fact of drinking their cocktails and laughing at their jokes, and that to cease to do so would be priggish or intolerant and, of course, puritanical. Again, the double life. The double life does us no favors. It's, if you're a superhero fan, I mean, how many comic books or movies have you seen about superheroes having to live the double life and having to keep the double life straight? That's one of the big woes of Spider-Man and Peter Parker, is that the separation of life. You're just not able to do it. But the thing about it is that it can play a trick on us. Not only will we be miserable in two places, because, in my situation, in high school and church, you're not able to be your complete self, because you're thinking that you have to put yourself in the situation where you are in, not just in the situation where you are not. But also, and again, this is where pride can jump on our head, we can become deluded with the idea of, I'm doing everybody good. Again, to put it, and I didn't feel this way, but I'm using this as an example since we've developed this already. Put myself back in my high school days with my church friends. Well, I'm showing them something a little bit worldly. I'm showing them something from the other side of the track, somewhere a mentality from somebody that they're not used to, so I'm broadening their horizons. Contrariwise, I go to high school and be with my high school friends. So I say, well, I don't use the bad language they do, and I don't do this stuff they do. But so I'm bringing some light into their darkness without bashing it over their heads. Look, I'm doing them good. And so how do I view myself? I view myself as a well-rounded individual who is able to get along with church people and non-church people, and look at how fantastic I am. It's a trick. It's a mind trick. Because in reality, what I'm doing, not much. Because I am not doing good to either side of the life. And also, I'm lying to myself. And also, I'm not allowing myself to be a complete person. And all this so that I can keep up friends. All this so I can just have people in my life. In reality, I'm missing out on life completely. And also putting my life with God in jeopardy. So is it worth it? No. A few weeks ago, I did a sermon, and the opening illustration was based on Mortal Kombat. Yeah, that Mortal Kombat, the arcade game. I was born in '79, so into the '80s and into the early '90s, I loved the arcade. Right, video games and all that. I actually make my son jealous because, I grew up in the time in which, going to the arcade was like a social event. It was a big, cool thing. And when you played Mortal Kombat, when you put your quarter in and you hit start, and you choose your character, the next screen that pops up is a screen that says "Choose Your Destiny," and it's said with a big, deep, low, scary voice. Choose your destiny. And you get 4 columns. You got the novice, the warrior, the master, and then the champion. And the novice is for the beginner, and it's a short tournament. The warrior's like another step more, master is another step beyond that, and then champion is like another step above that, and it's the hardest of the go. And the thing about it is like you get to choose which path you want to take. But the point I made in the sermon is, look, you drop the quarter, you got to play. And it's the same thing with our life too. We're here. We have to play. We drop the quarter. We got to let it play. And so if we're going to choose to walk with the Lord, then we have to choose. We have to choose our destiny. And are we going to allow our life with the Lord to dictate what kind of people we allow into the confines of our heart? Because that's what we're talking about friendship really is. Those people who we allow inside of our hearts. And if we choose to allow people in there that are going to actively put us at odds with God, that friendship is not worth it. And we're going to be put into a dangerous place. Be mindful of who we allow into the deep recesses of our hearts. Because a heart can be broken. And people have walked away from the Lord because of the outside influence in their lives. May we not add to that number, but instead be diligent. And as we seek to help and save the lost, absolutely, we got to get out there and talk to people and get to know people. But as far as who we allow into the deep recesses of our hearts, may we be careful who we allow in there. Because whoever we allow in there will have a deep impact on our lives. Grace and peace to you. We'll talk to you all next time.